In the European market, do you know which plug-in hybrid was the best-selling car in 2025? Let me give you a hint. It's actually an older hybrid model that has already been discontinued in China, but globally, it's been leading the way into new markets. Yes! It's the BYD Seal U DM-i, known in China as the BYD Song Plus DM-i. Now here is the surprising part. This car has basically disappeared from the new car sales charts in China. But in Europe, it became the #1 best-selling plug-in hybrid in 2025. Now let us zoom out a little. In 2025, Europe's overall car market only grew by about 2%. But during that same time, Chinese automakers almost doubled their market share. And this was not just about electric cars. Plug-in hybrid models from Chinese brands saw an incredible 600% growth. Leading the way was the BYD Seal U DM-i, taking the top spot in the segment. And it was far ahead of second and third place the Volkswagen Tiguan eHybrid and the Volvo XC60 Recharge. There were also 2 more Chinese models on the list, the Jaecoo 7 PHEV from the Chery and the MG HS plug-in hybrid from MG. But here is where it gets interesting. Plug-in hybrids in Europe were once seen as something unnecessary, not fully electric, not fully gasoline. Just an awkward middle option that many people thought would disappear. At one point, this segment was even expected to be phased out completely. So why is it suddenly coming back? And what role are Chinese automakers playing in this story? Before we talk about China's rise, let's take a quick look at what happened in Europe between 2020 and 2025. There is a clear trend. From 2020 to 2022, the market grew very quickly. Then in 2023, it suddenly slowed down. And by 2025, it started to recover again, but slowly. So what was really driving all of this? There was actually a hidden force behind it, and that force was subsidies. Let's take Germany as an example. For a long time, the government offered strong support for plug-in hybrids. This included tax benefits and also around 300 euros in direct cash incentives. Now the cash part is easy to understand, but the tax benefit part can feel a bit confusing. So let me break it down in a simple way. In Europe, when a company gives an employee a car, it's not just a free perk. It is treated as part of your income. They call it a non-cash benefit. And yes, you have to pay tax on it. Here is how it works in Germany. The tax is calculated as 1% of the car's official price every month. So let's say the car costs 40,000 euros. That means 400 euros is added to your monthly income on paper. Even though you do not actually receive that money, you still have to pay tax as if you did. Now here is where plug-in hybrids become interesting. For plug-in hybrids, that rate is cut in half to 0.5%. And for fully electric cars, it drops even further to just 0.25%. So using the same example, instead of 400 euros, you are only taxed on 200 euros if you drive a plug-in hybrid. That is a pretty big difference. And this connects to something very important about Europe. It is a market heavily driven by company fleets. Most cars are bought by companies, not individuals. So from a company's point of view, plug-in hybrids make a lot of sense. They still get tax benefits, even if not as much as electric cars. But at the same time, they do not have to worry about charging infrastructure. No need to install chargers everywhere. No need to deal with range anxiety complaints from employees. So naturally, companies were very happy to choose plug-in hybrids as company cars. And that is why between 2020 and 2022, European governments were still willing to support this segment. In simple terms, the real driving force behind the plug-in hybrid market was not individual consumers, it was companies. And because these companies had long-standing relationships with local brands, they mostly preferred European automakers. Now here is something interesting. When it comes to user experience, fleet managers in European companies honestly did not care that much. That was never their main concern. And this led to some pretty crazy situations. A lot of plug-in hybrids, after finishing their company lease period, ended up in the used car market with charging ports and charging cables that were basically brand new. Yes, untouched. And what about fuel consumption? Many traditional European plug-in hybrids use the system where the engine does most of the work at higher speeds. So in reality, they are not that fuel efficient. But again, it was not really a concern. Why? Because for many employees, fuel costs were reimbursed by the company anyway. So when you look at it like this, it becomes very clear the growth of the plug-in hybrid market in Europe during those years was not real demand. It was more like a policy-driven illusion. The whole thing charging was supported by tax benefits and company purchases. Companies bought them because it saved money and reduced hassle. Employees drove them because fuel was covered. But whether the car was actually efficient or whether the charging experience was good, nobody really cared. And that is why you get these strange stories. Cars being used for years and the charging port still looks brand new. But this kind of growth could not last forever. Once the policies changed, everything changed. After 2023, this system basically collapsed. The biggest turning point was Germany removing subsidies for plug-in hybrids. And once that happened, companies lost the motivation to keep buying them. As a result, the European plug-in hybrid market went into a slowdown for the next couple of years. So now the big question is, what makes Chinese plug-in hybrid different? How did they manage to bring this market back? Let's go back to BYD. In January 2023, when BYD first entered the German market, they were selling only about 50 cars per month. At that time, a lot of people were skeptical. They were asking, can Chinese cars really compete in Europe? Fast forward to 2025, BYD sold 23,306 vehicles in Germany. And out of those, around 14,000 were plug-in hybrids. That is enough to put them firmly at the top of the plug-in hybrid segment in Europe. So what exactly makes BYD so special? Let's look at what the media in Germany had to say. A German publication reviewed the BYD Seal U Wagon, and their feedback was actually very interesting. They said the coordination between electric motor and the engine feels very smooth. There is none of that typical jerk you get when the engine suddenly kicks in and shifts gears like in many traditional plug-in hybrids. In pure electric mode, the energy consumption is very close to a full electric car. And on the highway, at speeds between 120 and 160 km per hour, fuel consumption is around 5.5 liters per 100 kilometers. That is simply better than most other plug-in hybrids. And then there is the total range. With a full tank and a full charge, you can get around 1200 to 1300 kilometers. The review even went as far as calling it a potential quote-unquote end of the oil crisis. Now that might sound a bit dramatic, but their point was very clear. They used BYD as an example to show that plug-in hybrid technology is still evolving. It is no longer the old image people had in Europe, where plug-in hybrids were seen as cars that were neither fuel efficient nor energy efficient. So you could say, with systems like BYD's DM-i, Chinese plug-in hybrids are bringing something new to the table in Europe. They actually have a clear technical identity. Now, BYD is just one part of the story. What about other Chinese brands? Companies like Leapmotor, Chery, SAIC Motor, Great Wall Motor, and Geely are all actively expanding into the European plug-in hybrid market. And when it comes to technology, there are a few different approaches. Leapmotor focuses on range extender systems. BYD uses its DM-i system, and many other brands are going with 2-speed or 3-speed DHT transmissions. These multi-gear systems can handle a wider range of driving conditions. These systems are more complex compared to simpler setups like range extender systems or BYD's DM-i, which focus more on efficiency and simplicity. So in the end, there is no absolute winner in terms of technology. Each approach has its pros and cons. But if you compare all of this to traditional European plug-in hybrids, you will notice one big difference. European systems are still mostly engine-driven with electric support. Chinese systems, on the other hand, are clearly electric first. And that is the key. Almost all Chinese brands are moving in the same direction. They are building plug-in hybrids that feel more like electric cars. Now, if we combine this with their sales growth, we can see a clear conclusion. The success of Chinese plug-in hybrids in Europe is merely because their products match the market's changing needs. Remember, earlier we talked about how the market slowed down around 2023. That was actually a turning point, because from that moment on, the market stopped being driven by policy and started being driven by the product itself. At the same time, something else was happening. Europe still wants to go electric. That is the long-term goal. But in reality, infrastructure is not keeping up. So now you hear more voices from both government and the industry saying, we still want electrification, but maybe we should slow down a bit. And that is where plug-in hybrids come back into the picture. They are now being seen again as a transition technology, not the final goal, but a very useful step in between. And this shift toward electrification has actually changed the definition of plug-in hybrids. They're no longer seen as gasoline cars with a battery attached. Instead, they are becoming electric cars with a fuel tank as backup. In this new context, Chinese plug-in hybrids stand out even more. They're affordable, and more importantly, they are designed with an electric-first driving experience. For users who cannot install home charging stations, these cars offer something very close to a fully electric driving feel, and that creates a clear difference compared to traditional European plug-in hybrids. For people who have already experienced pure electric cars, Chinese plug-in hybrids feel much closer to that EV driving style. At the same time, they can still fully use existing home charging setups, and because of that, many of these users tend to choose long-range plug-in hybrids. Let's take a few real examples. When we visited a BYD store in Stuttgart, we also interviewed a family of 3. They told us very clearly that compared to their previous Jeep plug-in hybrid, the BYD offered a much better driving experience. A Turkish sales representative also shared an interesting perspective. He explained that for families living in cities where installing a home charger is difficult, plug-in hybrids offer a very practical solution. You basically get a fuel-powered car that still feels like driving an electric vehicle. And the long-range capability also matters a lot. For some minority communities, such as Turkish or Greek families, it makes long-distance cross-border travel much easier. Now, for fleet users like taxi companies, BYD plug-in hybrids offer something even more interesting. They get both advantages at the same time. During daily driving, they use electricity and keep costs low. But when they get long-distance trips, they can instantly switch to fuel mode with still relatively good efficiency. It is basically the best of both worlds. Now, let's wrap this up with a few thoughts on strategy. In my opinion, when Chinese automakers expand into Europe, it's not enough to just match local user needs, pricing and after-sales service. They also need to build a clear technical identity, a unique selling point. Right now, brands like BYD and SAIC Motor have already established a strong presence in the plug-in hybrid segment. The next step is to strengthen that technological advantage. From my perspective, there are 2 possible directions. First, extend electric range even further, making the EV experience stronger. Second, improve fast charging capability, including high-power charging systems like 800-volt or even 1,000-volt platforms. This would encourage European users to drive more in electric mode. It would also make plug-in hybrids feel even closer to full electric vehicles. And in the long run, it could guide users toward full electric models from Chinese brands. Because in the end, plug-in hybrids mean very different things depending on the mindset. In Europe, engineers often see them as a tool, a way to extend the life of combustion engines, capture incentives, and delay the full transition. But in China, the thinking is different. Plug-in hybrids are seen as a bridge, a way to gradually guide users into the full electric world. One is policy-driven, the other is user-driven. One focuses on extending the old system, the other focuses on improving the transition experience. And that difference is clearly reflected in the market results. When I saw the BYD Song Plus DM-i take the number 1 spot in Europe's plug-in hybrid sales rankings, one thought immediately came to my mind: you reap what you sow.